Looks like we are live. Maybe I should have put my camera over on the other side. How's it going, Justice?
Oh,
Good. We're going to see, guys, if we can go live, and how do I get it to pull up my content on the other side? We're just going to put this up because we got multiple streams going here. We're going to see if this works. So, hopefully it does. If something goes awry, let us know. But we started a stream. I got some questions from my buddy that sent me a couple of these podcasts. And this gentleman, I think his name is Brandon, the guy speaking here shortly. But we talk about the most dangerous story, and here's why. So, this is the story of Abraham and Isaac. So, just for kicks, I brought Justice along. Do you know the story of Abraham and Isaac, Justice?
yeah.
How does that make you feel right now?
I don't know. No, nothing.
No? Okay. Well, without further ado, I'm going to keep charging my phone if this will plug in, but let's see. Alright, so one viewer, welcome. If this gets confusing, let us know. But this is this guy's podcast, so I don't know if you can see us on the broadcast or the live side, but I'm going to play some of what this gentleman has to say, so you won't see it on the live side. Why is it?
Today's episode with a question for those of you that believe in the God of Abraham. What would you do if this God asked you to kill your child? Not spiritually, not metaphorically, literally asked you to kill your child.
So that's the first question, Justice. So you don't have children, but I do. It's terrifying. Alright, so what is your most beloved thing in this planet? Because that's probably how I would define
Probably family.
family.
Yeah.
Well, that's how I would feel about you. And so that's why I feel like it would be... I feel like that would potentially be the hardest thing I've ever had to do or been asked. And so, in saying that, I did actually put together some ideas of why I think that would be so difficult. And do you feel like you see that trend in the Bible where God asks us to do things that are nearly impossible?
Kind of.
Like I feel like it's a lot less time involved, but it would be a lot more intense. What if God told you to build an ark?
I'd build a small ark.
But God didn't say to build a small ark. He said, he gave him the dimensions, right?
Wow. Well, if he did, then I'd do it probably.
So what if he said it's got to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high?
I don't know.
Well, I guess my point is that I think that the Bible has some pretty extreme ideas of what commitment looks like, right? Right? So I think that this is just another one of those. However, I feel like this is not to minimize it, because I'd much rather build an ark than take yours or anybody else's life. But let's keep going with this review video and see where it goes.
Would you obey? Before you answer, let me introduce you to a few people that did. Andrea Yates in 2001, a devout Christian in this century, in this country, took her 5 children one by one to the bathroom. room and drowned each of them. She was asked point blank, "Why did you do this?" She said, "I had to. I had to obey God." Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Isn't that the definition of biblical morality? Maybe that's something you haven't thought about much. We are going to get into it, but a couple more examples. How about Deanna Laney, another Christian mother? She bludgeoned her 2 sons to death in the backyard. She believed sincerely that God was testing her, just like Abraham. She literally...
So what do you think about that, Justice? Does that sound pretty crazy?
Kinda. Not really.
I mean, are you talking about the woman that killed her sons to, bludgeoned them? Or are you talking about the biblical story?
Oh, that.
This? Yeah. Well, I think that, so when we talk about hearing is it done?
Kinda.
So I think when we talk about hearing the voice of God, me personally, that's something where I would say that I don't actually hear like a outward, like, Kyle, you need to do this with your life. What I hear personally is, well, I don't hear the voices in my head. I guess you could say that. So I feel like this is one of those perfect instances where you need to have the ability to rightly divide what is God and what's kind of the own internal voice in your head saying, you need to do this, you need to do that. But also, on that note, I don't feel as if God, that was the whole point of having Jesus step into the role of paving the way for our salvation. Because there was this propensity for human and animal sacrifice. So that's a big thing in the unbelief or the atheists' viewpoint, is that, you know, their belief is that there's a lot of it's like a blood cult, and that there's a huge desire for blood. And so I do think that that's a huge degree of separation between the Old and the New Testament. You have anything to say on that?
Not really.
Because I was kind of looking at this to kind of get into this a little bit deeper. Oh, that's putting that over on that screen, huh? Why is it doing that? So, anyways, we'll play this real quick and continue.
Cited Abraham and Isaac in court. She said very confidently, "I knew God would stop me if he didn't really want me to do this." But he didn't stop her. How many parents at Jonestown poisoned their babies, their children, because Jim Jones claimed it was divine authority? How are we supposed to know the difference between the voice of God and mental illness? Psychologists note that religious delusions are among the most common in cases of psychosis. Many hear voices that sound divine. They feel compelled to act. And yet, when those commands are horrific, we rightly call it madness. Unless, of course, it's in the Bible. I have no doubt that if you are a Christian and you are exposed to any of the cases that I just brought up, you have no problem judging it, saying they shouldn't have done that. Clearly that wasn't from God. But I ask you, how can you say that when we have...
What's up, Marcel? How are you doing? Welcome. We're just tackling some tough questions in our little Bible study. So welcome. Thank you for coming. I think that this goes back to that point too, is it's like you got to be able to know what is the difference between what God would ask of your life and when are you actually hearing, Kyle, you're going to go build an ark, or it's time for human sacrifice. But I don't feel like, I mean, at this point, luckily, I don't think that we have to answer that question. Maybe potentially some things that are just as difficult. But I believe that it's not just like this idea in the back of your head. I believe if God tells you, then he's going to make a way for those things to happen. But you're going to know because, I mean, at this point, this was one of the commandments that now would be a violation. But at the same time, God provided the ram, right? So, and in more ways than one.
the example of Abraham and Isaac. By the way, I know what excuses you have, and please stay tuned to the end of the video. I'm going to handle each objection one by one. The reason I even wanted to make this video, one quick personal story, and then we're going to dive into all of it here, is the very first time I actually said out loud that I was an atheist was with my wife, my sister, and my brother-in-law. We had a little debate that lasted the rest of the night while he pressed me on my position. And at one point, we got to some of the horrors of the Old Testament, and I brought up the character of a God that would test someone like Abraham, the patriarch of the religion, to see if he would kill his son. And I didn't realize this was such a common trope to throw out at Christians to prove a point, but I genuinely asked him, you believe in this God? If this God told you to kill your baby, my sister was pregnant at the time with their first child, would you do it? He avoided the question. I kept pressing. Then he tried to tell me it wasn't in God's nature, so this hypothetical didn't even make sense, to which I pointed all the times that God did kill children, and that whether or not he had Abraham go through with it, Abraham didn't know that. So this happening very much is in the nature of this God. And I'll never...
So, do you have any feelings or thoughts on that? No?
Not really.
Okay, so here's one of my thoughts, is that I believe that God, just like the vast majority of our life, a lot of it is we're given the opportunity to choose freely in between a multitude of decisions. But I feel like God most commonly honors the component of obedience. And anytime that there's an idol or idolization in between us and something else, even our own child, then, we know that God can be a jealous God. And I do believe that that's a healthy jealousy, but obviously I do think that that can be understood in a way that is obviously, we could call this a toxic approach or relationship or whatever, but I don't believe that that's the case. I believe that there's healthy jealousy in relationships. Do you agree with that?
Kinda.
Okay. Why not, or why?
I kinda do and I kinda don't.
Well, if, let's say, two people are married, do you think that it's okay for one of the people that are married to entertain another potential romantic interest?
No.
Right? And you're 12 and you understand that, right? So that's a healthy form of jealousy, in my opinion. And I believe that this is a very, not necessarily romantic, obviously, but I still feel like this kind of dives into that dynamic of Abraham for many, many years wanted a child. And do you remember what he did?
Yeah, he killed his son and cut his head off.
He killed his son. He didn't kill his son.
He didn't do that.
No.
Well, he went to, hit him with the thing.
He was going to kill him, but he didn't.
Well, he didn't, because God.
Right. God stepped in and said that I provided this lamb, right?
Lamb?
Or ram.
Yeah, I think so.
Right. So my personal opinion is that so Abraham was trying to have a kid for many years, and he and his wife could not have a child together. So just like many times, I feel like that's a very common theme, that what happens is that we tend to go out and try to provide something else as a substitute. And so what happened was he ended up basically sleeping with this servant that they had to try and have a child that they thought that they were supposed to have. And I believe that we try to many times circumvent the way God wants us to do it in our own way. And this is just kind of one of those where God is really calling us, hey, are you actually going to sacrifice that thing that means so much, or what's going to happen? So, which maybe, depending on if you respond, Brandon, we'll get more questions on that, but that's cool. It's a good conversation.
forget his answer. At least he told the truth, but it is a sickening truth. He said, well, if God, which I know he wouldn't, did that, I would only hope that I had as much faith as Abraham to be able to complete it. And if you're a Christian, what other answer can you give? You're called to obey God. To love God is to obey God. You're called to put him above everything else in your life, including your family. Jesus makes that abundantly clear. That's why this test exists in the Bible in the first place. So back to my original question to you believers, if God told you to kill your child, would you? If the answer is no, congratulations, you have outgrown the corrupt and ridiculous morality of the Bible. If your answer is yes, you show clearly that morality has nothing to do with what is right or what is good. It has to do with who is in power. And you show your blind devotion and your willingness to commit horror and harm for your God of love and peace. So here's our agenda for today. I want to walk through the story as it's told in Genesis 22 and point a few things out. I want to talk about what morality was like at this time, what that word means, the differences that modern day Christians can't seem to grasp, and thus are put in this horrendous, tough spot of having to defend a God like this who is clearly just man-made concepts of their time and place and culture. I want to talk about the praise that Abraham gets from the Bible. I want to talk about divine command theory and its problems. Then I have a simple question for you, and then we're going to handle some of the objections. It sounds like a lot. I think we can go pretty quick here. This is a story that deserves time and attention, though. This is the patriarch of 3 religions. We call it the Abrahamic faiths because of this person. This is the one person in the Bible that was called a friend of God. This is the justification, by the way, that we get for why God could command all the genocide he did, because all the other people were so evil and horrendous, sacrificing their children, like Abraham was willing to do, because he was a product of that time and place, like God did, supposedly, because he loves us when he sacrificed his only son, Jesus. This is a death cult. This is a blood magic, sacrificial, scapegoat, backward culture. So, turn your Bibles to Genesis 22. The story begins by saying that sometime later, God tested Abraham. Keep in mind, this is an all-knowing God, but okay, we'll just buy into the fact that he needs to test him. By the way, not sometime later, God supported Abraham, comforted Abraham, loved Abraham, taught Abraham, enlightened Abraham. No, tested. And what was he tested for? His generosity? His love? His mercy? Nope. It was obedience through the unthinkable. Next comes the command, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac. He tells him where to go, and he says, sacrifice him as a burnt offering. God knows what he's asking. He knows the emotional bond. In fact, he names it. Then he demands that it be severed. Cut to the next scene, the morning after. So Abraham rose early in the morning. No questions, no begging, no wrestling, no tears. He doesn't say, why, Lord? He doesn't say there must be another way. He doesn't question, is this really you? Something I think is really important to point out. Going back to the example of my brother-in-law, when he said it's not in God's nature, wouldn't that have struck Abraham's ear wrong?
But isn't that part of the point, right? Part of the point is this seems so completely radical. But at the same time, if we know the God that we serve is stepping in and does have a way, we know that his ways are higher than ours. So even though we know he might be asking something that would sound absurd, I feel like that is the whole point, right? So when he's not having this emotional, I don't believe it's calloused in the sense of emotionally, but strength. And so he knows that God will provide a way that's better than his way, even though that's what's happening here.
If that was the case, wait, I better hold on. Is this really from God? A good God of love, peace, and creation wants me to kill a child? My child? This can't be. Let me double check. But no, he just sharpens the knife and saddles the donkey, splits the wood himself. And Isaac doesn't even know. He walks beside the man that he trusts the most in the entire world, the man that has been put in a place to protect him, to support him, carrying.
I feel like that's an interesting parallel to note, right? So if the son trusts the father that much, then Abraham must trust God that much, because that has to be modeled behavior, right? That's kind of my thought. What do you think about that?
Probably.
Right, like you don't trust me because you think that I could potentially murder you at any point, right?
Yeah.
you trust me because I've demonstrated over and over that it's quite the opposite, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I think that that's what's going on here. But, of course, if you're just reflecting on this, of course, it's going to sound absurd. And who can blame anybody for thinking otherwise?
In the very wood on which he will burn. We move on to the climb, because of course this is done at the top of a mountain where all sacred things happen. Isaac questions, here's the fire, here's the wood, where is the lamb? God will provide the lamb, Abraham answers. Was that a lie? Was that a desperate hope? Or is it just the terrifying truth spoken boldly straight to his son? Keep in mind, we're never told what Abraham is thinking, because in this story, that is not the point. Feeling is not the point. Obedience is. What I'm trying to help give you is the correct context in which the story was originally put, what it was trying to communicate. You're going to see it develop a little bit clearer here in just a second. Next, we get to the altar. The text is sparse, chillingly so. No internal monologue, no hesitation. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar. Does Isaac struggle? Does he cry out? Do we see a look of confusion and abandonment and betrayal? Does he understand what is happening to him? We're not told, because again, the focus is not on the victim, it's on the virtue of the one holding the knife. Let that sink in. So then, yes, we get the intervention. The angel of the Lord calls out, do not lay a hand on that boy. Now I know that you fear God. Not love God, not trust God, but fear. This was never about compassion, which is how the story is spun when it's included in these children's Bibles, which is so disgusting. It's about control. The story ends not with Isaac's relief, not with a father-son moment, but with Abraham's reward. He passed the test. He obeyed at any cost, blindly and immediately. So what's the message? What's the moral of the story? What is being taught here? That obedience to divine authority trumps all. Trumps emotion, feeling, love, family, anything. That the good father is the one willing to become a murderer if God commands it. The conversation we're having today is on the nature of morality. Something Christians claim over and over is objective. Is killing a child wrong? Doesn't seem like a complicated question. Most of us can simply say yes. But a Christian, a real Christian, can't so easily say that. Not if they want to defend their God, to defend their Bible, or to be 100% obedient. Because then that simple question, is it wrong to kill a child, becomes, well, and that is why religion is harmful. If it depends on your God and how he's feeling that day, or what he might want, or some situation that might necessitate that for him to be able to complete his will, you've lost the morality game. And it's funny because this story is right here. Horror, genocide. The number one excuse is you don't understand how evil these people were. They have to be wiped out. Do you know what they're doing? They're sacrificing.
Well, and I think, well, do you have any opinions on this, Justice? So, like, if we're talking, like, Noah's Ark, like, the amount of evil in the world at that point.
What about it?
Do you think God was right in killing everybody other than a few that entered Noah's Ark? Sure?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the question is, well...
And he made it.
Right. I mean, I think that that's the whole thing is God
and
doesn't...
How would you feel about if you made a little Lego figurine that moves around and makes little noises and just killing it?
Well, I think that there'd have to be a pretty significant underlying rationale to wipe out all of your little Legos if they were acting evil.
I mean, what would you do if they were attacking you and cussing you out?
Well, it would be, I would probably have my fill of them, that's for sure. So I think that that's like, I mean, God doesn't necessarily owe any of us an explanation for what he's doing or how he navigates the world that he created. At least that's my opinion. And of course, we don't know, but those are those questions that, hey, maybe at some point we'll get to ask God when we are done here on this planet.
children. You mean like Abraham was willing to do, like God did. Now all of a sudden it's wrong. That the answer to some tribes sometimes that sacrifice some children is to kill all the children and all the women and all the men and all the elderly and all the sick and all the animals. It's time to grow up. I'm not usually this stern or trying to cause any controversy, but if you are a grown adult with a fully developed prefrontal cortex and you are still sitting around trying to justify why...
So I think that this is an interesting point just because I could see so many people that I know. I mean, you'd be surprised the things that people do within their own human comprehension that they feel like they've been done wrong. So they're going to go, I mean, it doesn't literally have to be anything that significant for somebody to want to take a life or do something extreme. So that's kind of my underlying personal opinion. What do you think?
What was the question?
Oh, just about wiping out people, wanting to kill them.
Like as God?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think he's fine doing that.
Right. Kind of my personal thought there too, but that's his call, not ours, right?
Genocide or slavery or child sacrifice was okay when your God did it, then yes, it's time to grow up. It's time to mature morally. But let's move on, because if that's your morality, you're not alone. That was the morality of the world back then. I just did this video on the axial age, the transition, the bridge between mythos and logos. Not that afterwards no one believed in gods anymore, but the questions changed. Can gods be evil? Can they be imperfect? What is true morality? What is it to live a good life? Because in the pre-axial age, like this story from the Old Testament, and we're painting with a broad brush here. This isn't true for everyone that ever lived in every place, in every culture, and every time. But generally speaking, morality was tribal. It was authoritarian. Gods were tribal patrons. Marduk, Baal, Yahweh. Their job was to defend the tribe. They were war gods. Their job was not to be some moral guide. Divine approval meant victory, not virtue. Children were sacrificed in Canaanite and Moabite and even early Israelite traditions. So the story of Abraham wasn't shocking for its time. What's shocking is that it still holds moral weight now, because we've moved past this. Or maybe we haven't. And so that's why I want to move into this next section here, where I show the power.
Do you think that that's still relevant? Since you're the younger generation here?
Like killing?
So like the story of, so really the point of this story, what do you think the story of Abraham and Isaac is significant in?
What do you mean significant?
Like what's the most important reason that story is being told, do you feel like?
I don't know, to be like a rule or like to show people.
To follow the rules?
No, like to show them what maybe you should do. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So obedience.
Mhm.
So I think that it's extreme for today's culture, as he says. Although he wants to, Brandon, you want to just go right over that like it doesn't mean anything. But I feel like that's a extremely significant reason of why this story is so relevant, even currently. I mean, well, yeah, we'll go on. If we can. Apparently.
Of this one particular story as a moral model. Because Abraham didn't just pass a test. In passing that test, he became the prototype for what it means to have faith. Think about that. All built on this moment. Maybe I wasn't clear. The blessing that follows after he passes this test is this: I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. All off this singular moment of if Abraham was willing to kill, to murder his child. As a father of two small children, it is so far beyond my comprehension, the ability to harm any child. I mean, my empathy since having children has gone through the roof. I can't watch movies and shows that I used to watch, even as a Christian. My heart aches and truly breaks when I read an article about some horrendous thing that has happened to a small child because of their innocence, because of how terrified they must be, because of how they can't even figure out what is going on. The confusion, the terror, the trauma. I can't imagine what my son's face would look like as I bind him, where before he has only seen animals be bound in this way, and as I silently raise a knife.
Okay, so in this point, I feel like there's many times when, and I'm saying this is different, but you're talking about traumatic experiences, right? Have you had traumatic experiences, Justice, where you did things that you didn't want to do, and they traumatized you even though they might have been better?
Kinda.
I mean, I can speak on this because I remember...
20 pages.
Yeah, he has trauma for what was that one?
Homeschool. Every
Yeah,
day,
some
20
homeschool.
pages.
Some homeschool. But it wasn't because I was trying to punish you, right?
I think so.
Maybe at times. There's consequences. But I think that this is very similar in that light too, you know. I think that there's consequences for disobedience, and we can't act like there's not. Like, I mean, you may have to discipline your child for breaking a rule. It's not a law, but if you don't discipline your child, then they are subject to the law. And that's the authority outside of your house, right? So I feel like there's a progression of the innermost circle of a family doing things out of love and care, but still to that point, like, don't touch the stove, right? And you might get your hand swatted or spanked, or you lose your computer privileges, right? So, but on that same token, what's better? Losing privileges, a spanking, or hand slapped, or then you got a burned hand?
I'd rather not give you ideas.
So, he doesn't want to give me ideas. But I mean, in that essence too, like crossing the street. Like, there's points of where the obedience makes sense. It's better to get disciplined.
It's kind of common sense, though.
What? Not when you're like a young kid, like it is now that you're 12, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like that's a huge correlation to this as well. And I don't feel like the trauma aspect of like, oh, well, we really like terrified our child. I mean, a lot of life is like that. And I feel like that's where some of the best things happen, is doing those things that absolutely scare the heck out of you. So.
Above him, that moment alone, even if nothing happens afterwards, you couldn't pay me enough money. You couldn't give me enough riches or blessings from heaven to make even that beginning moment happen. So who's the moral monster in my not willing to do that to my son, even if the God of the universe asked? Is it me, or would it be the God asking? But back to Abraham being this moral model, because the Bible doesn't just tell this story, it glorifies it. In the Bible.
Well, but this is also because you're assuming this, Brandon, in your own comprehension and not in Abraham's walk with the Lord. And I feel like that's a huge difference.
Is this guy Brandon?
This guy's Brandon. So But my personal opinion is that this would be completely different if you had more engagement, maybe, right?
Oh, did you see? Is this the guy in your live stream?
This is Dan sent me this guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bible, this story isn't questioned, it isn't tragic, it isn't regretted. It's seen as the pinnacle of faith. In Hebrews 11:17 through 19, we get, by faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. It frames Abraham as not a desperate father, but a theological hero, one who reasoned that murder was okay if resurrection was on the table, which, by the way, this is already a cope. Morality had already started to evolve by the time we get the writing of Hebrews, and we have to retcon some of the earlier patriarchs. We see this in a lot of the New Testament, actually. Maybe I'll make a whole video about this. Nowhere in the original text in Genesis 22 do we get some idea that Abraham knew God's power to resurrect, that he was secretly hoping God would do this. He didn't know that. Nothing is said of the sort. But the New Testament author needs to somehow make Abraham not look like a sadistic monster. And so we get this cope, which still is horrendous. Here's how you can know it's ridiculous, because some of you actually think this is a good justification, and I'm skipping ahead to where I cover some of the objections, but many Christians will say this. Okay, so you're a Christian today. You have more reason than Abraham to believe in the power of resurrection. You believe in the story of Jesus raising Lazarus. You believe in Jesus' resurrection. So if God told you to slit a child's throat, would you do it? Under the guise of, well, if God really just wants me to do this and it's going to be bad, he can make it good by resurrecting him. No, see, you see the insanity. Why do we have such fog over our eyes when it comes to, well, it's in the Bible. Well, it's a long time ago. It's a bad excuse now, and it was a bad excuse then. James 2:21 through 22 says, was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? Imagine, Abraham's righteousness, which is fundamental to Abraham as the patriarch, isn't because of Abraham's kindness or abundant love or generosity, not even to wisdom. What is it tied to? Obedience. Don't you see? I said it earlier, but again, even Jesus says in the New Testament, to love me is to obey my commands. Love, righteousness, faith, they all come back to obey. So what's the result of all of this? You get a moral template, and it's lasted for millennia, for countless generations. The man who nearly killed his own child becomes the gold standard for what it is to be faithful, for what it is to be righteous, for what it is to know and love God. Do you not see the problems with this? And I'm not saying that every Christian out there is this close to killing their own child, but when you can excuse that, what can't you excuse? If true.
So I think that's a very accurate point right there, is that how many times has this actually been the case, right? So I was sure that somebody had probably done it. When you mentioned it first, I just had no awareness of it. But it's also like, well, how many other times is this in the Bible? And that's written over 1,500 years at least. So I'm curious what other instances. I mean, and that's the thing, right, is there's always the knockoffs of these things that, in my opinion, Satan will use to convolute the truth and to distract or manipulate or contort. Oh no. Where were we?
16 seconds.
11, 16?
16. 16 minutes.
Oh, 16 minutes. I was going to say we have to be further along than that.
Like 6, try 17.
Sorry, guys.
Were the truth, that it was something to be defended, that it was something to be shared, that it was something lovely, that it was something beautiful. You can talk all day about some of the very few pretty parts of the New Testament or Jesus' radical ethical changes. But if you believe your Bible, Jesus was there at this time with his Father, testing Abraham and blessing him for being willing to do this horrendous thing. It's trite to bring this up because it's so overdone, but it's so true. Bad people can do bad things, good people can do good things, but for a good person to do something bad often requires religion. Christianity is not exempt. It is the example of this. Parents reject their children who are gay because God said it was wrong. Women stay in abusive marriages.
So that's an interesting point, because that one comes up a lot in my Bible studies, and it's like, we're absolutely not called to reject those people. We're called to love on them. And while we would reject the sin, that doesn't mean that we reject the person. That's my personal opinion and interpretation of what the Bible says.
Because divorce is wrong. Children are physically beaten because the Bible says to spare the rod is to spoil the child. Soldiers commit horrific atrocities at war under the banner of divine authority. There's nothing, I mean nothing, that cannot be justified by appealing to the Bible, to this religion. That's terrifying. I'm glad people are more moral despite their faith and despite their Bible, but it is not because of their faith or because of their Bible. Half of the world's religious population claims Abraham. His story is not some dusty corner. It is a pillar for half of the people who claim a God on this planet. His act that is the most egregious thing I can think of, one of them, is not condemned by them. It's glorified. So it's not just about one man or one example or one Old Testament story. This is about what kind of people we are being trained to become on a world scale. If you cannot condemn this story outright as backwards and wrong, then I don't know how we can just pretend that these religions are good and useful. If that was good to God then, it's good to God now. And you don't get to say it's not because some veil was torn or some other son was sacrificed. The funniest thing about this, the way that so many people get out of this problem is to say that, well, when God killed his son, he did away with that kind of morality. First of all, no, he didn't. That's not what is happening. And second of all, if it takes another actual committed act of child sacrifice to do so, do you not still see the problem with the model of morality? Man, I can just see it so clear. And I remember when I couldn't. And I think that's why I'm so passionate in trying to convey this and arrange this story for you factually and accurately and historically and contextually, so that maybe for the first time, you as someone who is doubting or on the fence or deconstructing, or maybe just here by chance, can actually wrestle with this the way that you should have, the way that we all should have.
I think that is a lot of great talking points and different ways to think through it. However, I believe that this gentleman's addressing it from a very surface level or superficial, how do you feel? And I feel like the feelings often mislead you while you're trying to look at the facts. I mean, the fact is like, okay, well, yeah, Abraham, it would be great if we could go back and tell God how to rewrite this story, but the fact is that this exists, and it didn't actually end up happening, but we're acting like it did in this scenario.
Instead of continuing to make excuses for it, and by way of promoting the religion or the faith or this God, promoting that as well. But goodness gracious, did I go off on a tangent? We are way off the agenda here. So I'm going to go quickly through a couple points, and then I want to ask you this question and cover the objections. So what this is, and I haven't named it yet, but it's divine command theory. Something is good because God commands it. Essentially, the person with the most power, who can threaten the most, which is what this God does, both old and new, they get to set the standard. And if that's true, then morality is arbitrary. This is where we get into Plato's Euthyphro dilemma, an important character in that axial age transition. But the dilemma is simple. Is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it was good? See, this kind of divine command theory leads to a lot of the issues we've already talked about. That slavery can be good, well, as long as God commands it.
I don't think that the Bible says that slavery is good. I believe that that's a common misunderstanding with unbelievers. I believe that the Bible does talk about slavery, but it's more or less referencing the fact that if you are a slave, then you are to obey your master. Not that I don't think slavery is good, or because God didn't make it a commandment. So I think that if you want to extrapolate that, you could say, I mean, how do we eliminate slavery? I mean, there's third world countries. They might be free, yes, but are they enslaved? I would say all day long. But yeah, of course, modern times, we would argue that slavery is wrong.
Genocide in Joshua is good. Well, yeah, if God commands it. That killing your own child is faithful. Well, yeah, if God commands it. I just think that this whole concept of obedience being the highest good is so backwards. Obedience is easy. Turning off your mind, not having to be responsible for your own decision.
What's your thought?
On this?
Oh, on something else?
Oh, no. No. Like, in this part or before?
Oh, either way.
Oh, kinda. Well, I kinda do. Kinda not.
Go ahead.
So, like, would... Can't think of, like, a good way to put it. So, you... So... You... What? So you're not supposed to have a slave, but you can have a slave?
Well, it's talking about in
Yeah,
biblical
you can make them
times.
obey.
Well, many times atheists or unbeliever thinks that God is saying that slavery is a good thing, and I don't believe that the Bible says that, or nowhere did have I read that, at least yet. But what it talks about is that the slave shall obey his master. But it also talks about, so when you actually mentioned earlier too, and I'm crossing over here, but it's like the thought of killing, right? And like waging holy wars. I'm not going to say that those didn't exist. I still believe that the Bible says that that is wrong and it's a sin. Doesn't make it right if it was waged in the name of God, right? I agree with that. But what it's talking about is I believe that the Bible's promoting peace among a situation that is not able to surpass what we believe would be the right way to have it conducted. Because I think that it's addressing the fact that there's always going to be these separations of different statuses and classes of people and skill sets, things like that. So I think that it's saying, hey, look, just like with the government, and if you want to talk about marriage, like if God surpasses all this stuff, then why does he still say that we should abide by basically the law of the land? So I think that it goes in line with that. So there's an attempt at creating order and obedience, again, to the different varying levels of command. Did you remember what you're going to say?
That's what it was.
Oh, that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not wrestling with your conscience or trying to figure out what is best or how we can know is lazy. You've outsourced morality. Isn't that the very thing we I know the Nazis are always the example, but isn't that the very thing we criticize from what is often cited as the definition of evil, Nazism, what happened in World War II, when the soldiers said they were just following orders? Did we let them off the hook? No, we've used that very excuse to show how weak their morality was, that it was that kind of an attitude that made them evil in the first place, because they were willing to not fight, to not stand up to tyranny, to not say, no, this is wrong, because it was easier to just obey. How can we see so clearly in that example how wrong it is, and then look at Abraham and praise him? So here's my question for you. In addition to the first one, would you kill your child if God said so? And I hope you'll really think about that if you're a believer or doubting or deconstructing. But what if Abraham had said no, is question number 2. Imagine a rewritten ending. What if Abraham, who supposedly really knew his God, said, no, I know the nature and character of my Father in heaven, and he would never ask me to do this. He would never allow this. This cannot be from him. Or what if he said, I thought I knew my Father, but one that would ask me to do this cannot be good and thus does not deserve my obedience? What if that was the test? What if
But I think, again, and I'll hammer back on that point, that what if that was the whole point, that Abraham wasn't emotionally volatile because of this is because he already knew. But like in hindsight, we want to react to this emotionally as if the emotions somehow change what's happening. Not that they wouldn't, but what if he already knew? What about that? Sorry, the internet is
Saying that, the angel says, "Well done," not because you obeyed, but because you loved, because you discerned, because you challenged. What if that was our moral model? Wouldn't that be better? Or do you think the best moral model is to obey no matter what because God says so? I think it's an interesting thing to really, truly consider. But let's end the video by handling a few objections that typically come up around the story of Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac. 1, it was just a test. God never intended for Isaac to die. God showed mercy. Even if that was the case, Abraham didn't know that. To Abraham, this was fully real. In his mind and in his heart, he was about to murder, to butcher, to burn his own son. That willingness was the test, and he passed it. So what does it say about this God if he would demand something like this? Emotional and psychological torment just to prove loyalty? Really? Not that I believe this actually happened, but insofar as the story goes, real harm occurred. Trust was shattered. Fear was real. Testing loyalty at the expense of a child's life, even theoretically, is not the act of a good being. It's the behavior of an insecure tyrant demanding proof of devotion. How utterly ridiculous. Objection 2. Well, God has the right to take life. After all, he's the one that gives it. This is a weird side angle to come from. Like, I get it. It's still horrendous, but when you try to use this to justify the flood or genocide commanded by God, and in general, this is an appeal to raw power, not to morality. So if morality does just simply depend on who has the power, then again, there's no good or evil, just winners and losers. By this logic, when Pharaoh drowns Hebrew babies, he's doing the right thing because he had the most power. Do you agree with that? No, of course you don't. Just like you don't agree that Hitler was doing the right moral thing when he ordered mass genocide just because he was the one with the power. This cannot be your approach to dealing with this kind of stuff. Might does not make right. And by the way, maybe 2.5 here, I guarantee one of the biggest things that will be said in the comment section below by Christians is, who are you to even say this? You don't even have a grounded source for your morality. You don't have objective morality. Neither do you. I admit freely, you're the one who won't. The morality is subjective, but I think we can base it off of some things like empathy, win-win solutions, fairness, equality, even selfishness to a degree, or self-protection is maybe a better term. To me, morality is a skill that we have gained, that we're still evolving along the way to interact with each other, to work in societies for the protection of ourselves and then others. An understanding of what it is to suffer, and that someone else has the capacity to suffer, and that you wouldn't want to suffer if you were them, and you'd want them to care if you were suffering, so maybe you should care that they're suffering. Even if it was just pure selfish quid pro quo kind of morality, it's light years better than that guy's got the most power. Whatever he says is right, is good, is moral. Come on. So if that is what you're going to say, save it, because plus this is an internal critique. This is what you believe. This is what your Bible says. This is what your religion professes. And it fails even in its own category, which leads us to objection 3. Well, Brandon, you're not being fair. You are applying a modern morality to an ancient story. Yes, we all should be, because of this one caveat, that it didn't stay in the past. I can't excuse what certain people have done in the past, because I do think slavery is always wrong. I do think genocide is always wrong, but I also understand that if I lived back then, I probably would have thought like they thought. And so when we evaluate history, the past, it's important to keep those framings in mind. But Christianity isn't trying to leave it in the past. They still present it as a model for morality. Abraham, why did you do this? She said,
again. Sorry, guys. Divine command. Where was
26.
Oh, good.
in the past. They still present it as.
So I think that there's the evolution of a lot of the underlying morality. it is easier to accept that. But I also think that there's, even in our modern day, I think that there's modern day slavery. You could also argue the fact on the other side. I mean, to be able to, live at the height or the level of luxury that we have, I would say that that's probably built on the backs of many other people, if we're being honest. So, whether it's the microphones and the computers we have assembled in China, I mean, what are the average wages around the world? Like, these people obviously don't have the same standard of living. They're not technically slaves. What would you call them?
As a model for morality. Abraham is still a hero, if not the hero of the faith. So the believer has brought this moral to the present. And if it's here, I'm going to apply our present day standards to it. And look, it fails so very miserably. Because that's what we do when we evaluate the past. We'll look at something horrific and say, how tragic that they didn't know better or understand better, or that there wasn't some good God there to teach them and lead them. We see humanity's struggle to treat each other well. And if we could look at this story in the Bible and say, man, what a bummer. Here's an example of a moral failure. Then we might be able to forgive it a bit more as some ancient relic of brutality. But that's not how it's treated. It's held.
But it's just because we look at it and we admire it as believers doesn't mean that we're going to replicate it, right? Like, my father didn't take me up and try to create a human sacrifice with me. I don't believe that was the calling upon his life, and it was not meant as an example in that essence. It's meant as an example of obedience. So, why does that? I don't know. I guess it doesn't make sense. But, oh my goodness, I keep doing it. I guess the buttons are too close.
28 or 27 maybe.
God, who came prepared, who had the rope, had the wood, had the knife, brought no animal of his own. Maybe he hoped, maybe deep in his heart, he was praying for a different way, but he still raised that knife. And insofar as the story goes, we have every reason to believe that if God had not intervened right then and there, he would have killed that child. That means he was willing to do it. He showed no moral hesitation. And by the way, if he wasn't willing to do it, God wouldn't have rewarded him. Don't you see? It was the test. His willingness was the test. If he passed the test, it means he was willing. There's no debate about this. These are after the fact apologetics to try to lessen the insanity of this. But it doesn't work. None of these objections work. So let's close out. What am I trying to convey here? Well, for one, morality doesn't come from obedience, and it shouldn't. And we shouldn't be propping up religions that say it does. It comes from empathy and reason and courage, none of which are described in this story. This story still matters because blind obedience is still held up as a virtue. Loving God shouldn't mean to ignore your moral instincts or to harm those you care about. This is the distinction that so many adult Christians cannot seem to make. And in my estimation, solely out of either ignorance or fear, as they've been so long taught to cower before their God, that what is the beginning of wisdom? The fear of God. It's not weakness to disobey when the orders are unjust. It's wisdom. And I promise I'm almost done. But again, thinking about my brother-in-law, thinking about so many good Christians who I trust.
So, do you have any thoughts?
On this part?
Yeah, or any of the others. Okay, so one of my last thoughts here are that I think specifically that is the point, is to be, you're not obeying just, and you're not choosing. If God calls you, then you're stepping outside of that.
Why does God even try to test you if he already knows the answer?
Well, he might know the answer, but he's given you the freedom to choose. And that's exactly what this was about.
But if he already knows... why then would he harden Pharaoh's heart? So then he wouldn't give him the freedom to choose.
Why did he harden his heart?
Yeah.
Well, his heart was hardened, but that's because that was his own choice. Like, he chose not to let his people go, right? Let God's people go, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like, yeah, there's a lot of that argument of, if God already knows the answer, then why does he put you through the test, type of thing, right?
Mhm.
But I believe that that's the whole thing, where even with Satan, he knew Satan was going to try to overthrow him as well.
Mhm.
So I believe that that's part of the underlying reason of, like, creating hell was, at that point, then Satan is going to have a place to serve his consequences. But I don't know. But we get into more of that later too. Oh, sorry, did I get you?
No, that was me.
Who I love, who I know love each other and their children and the world and their neighbor. But I've heard too many of them too many times say, "Your will be done. I'm just a vessel. I don't have to understand it. Doesn't have to make sense to me. God's ways are higher. God created me. I'm just a living sacrifice. I'll do what is necessary. I'll do whatever God asks of me." What a terrifying proposition, when this story is just one of the hundreds, if not thousands, that showcase the true character and nature of this ancient tribal war god. We can do better. Thank you for listening today. Thanks for putting up with my tangents and my zeal. I'll see you Tuesday with another video. And until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support, my Iconoclast and
So I do appreciate this, just because it's causing me to dig deeper into my faith as well. And I'm always learning and enjoying the challenge. But guys, thank you for joining. I told Justice this wasn't going to take too long, and I lied. But anyways, I think it was a good one. So any other final thoughts? No? All right, guys, have a good night. God bless. Brandon, thank you for the content as well as all your supporting help. And I'll chat with you soon if I get another video sent to me. All right. Have a great night.